Well, good morning, Westside. What's up? It's good to see you guys this morning. Hey, if you're new with this, my name is Troy. I'm one of the pastors here, and it's my great privilege to get to share with you today, week number 5 of Resurrected. And we're really excited to do this, but I want to start off with a bit of an experiment, okay? So now, you guys, if you've been around here, you know I don't do this very often, so you're going to have to go big so I don't feel bad about myself later on, right? Because really, today is about me. As long as we're clear on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of a scenario. I'm going to paint just a little brief picture. And what I want you to do is, if that's a good one, if that's a preferable picture, is that the kind of outcome that you like, I want you to cheer and go crazy and go nuts, okay? Just like the Royals are winning, maybe, okay? Just saying. And if it's not a good scenario, maybe it's kind of a sad one, maybe it's kind of down, I want you to give me your best boo, all right? You got to talk back if we're going to do this. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, second row gets points down there. All right, so here's the first one. All right, that boy, that girl, that high school crush, the one you've just been longing, just like, oh, if they would only notice me, they ask you out to the homecoming dance. Yeah, that's pretty good. You could do better, but that was pretty good. That's good. But the next week, we have I'm so glad we can still be friends conversation. Boo. Yeah, that's terrible. Okay. How about this? There's this university, the program in the university you've been so dying to go to, and finally you open up that letter with trembling hands and you look at it and say, yes, I've been accepted. Yes. But when you go to school there, they infringe on all your quality me time by expecting you to study. You got a bigger boo than that. Come on now. They're expecting you to study. I had that problem. How about this? Let's see. Okay. So that woman, that beautiful woman, the woman of your dreams, you're standing across her from the aisle. She's wearing white, and she's looking as beautiful as you can possibly imagine. And she says, I do. Yeah. Okay, that next year, for the first time, you do your taxes together. You're sick. Okay, one last one. Okay, so after 9 months of expectation, 9 months of discomfort, 9 months of just, are you kidding me? And then those last few hours of labor, finally, you look your brand new baby girl in the face. Yeah, in 13 years, she becomes a teenager. Now, that was the most sincere response of anything else we just said. Today, we're talking about resurrected joy. You know, in life, we like to think of a successful life is like this. The boos outweigh the yays. The good times outweigh the bad times, right? You're more on top of the mountain than you were in the valley, right? We all kind of say, yeah, you know what? And we all strive to avoid discomfort. We strive to avoid pain. But despite all that striving, despite all of our efforts, it's like those valleys come. It's inevitable. They just kind of, like it or not, the older we get, we start to realize that those things are just going to come. And at one time or not, you're in a valley, and one time or not, you're in a peak. And very often, that those valleys, those hard times, like they're so tough, you don't even remember what it was like to feel good. You don't even remember what it was like to be happy. And our emotional well-being is just this roller coaster, goes up and down with our circumstances and up and down. And we talk about, as a Christian, we're supposed to have Christian joy, you know. And some of us, we have this thing, it's like we're supposed to be some kind of like happy Christian zombies. Yes, everything is great. Everything is wonderful. You know, but we know that that's not true. And what does Scripture say about that? Is it possible for us to have joy in our grieving? Is it possible for us to have joy in our loss? We look upon just a couple of weeks ago, Rick and Kay Warren. Rick is the author of The Purpose-Driven Life, and his wife Kay. And I used to work at Saddleback. I've been in Rick's house. I've spent time with him. I've hung out with his family's backyard. And they had a son, 27-year-old son, who has struggled his whole life with mental illness, took his own life. Ironically, 2 weeks earlier, Kay released a book called Choosing Joy When Happiness Isn't Enough. How is she expected to process this? Some of you might be here today, and you've been asking yourself some questions because of what happened in Boston this last week. And our whole country is grieving. Our whole country is sorrowful. Our whole country is angry because of the stupidity that men perpetrate on other people. Is it possible to have joy in the middle of that? Can you really ask someone who's lost a child? What about the mama in South Africa who's HIV positive? And who looks on her circumstances and, if her happiness that's based on her circumstances is going to be the litmus test for her joy, she's in a bad way because nothing's changing anytime soon. And she has a child who is also born HIV positive. Can she have joy in the middle of that? And I want to suggest to you something today, that joy is a whole other category from happiness or sadness. That it is really unrelated to our circumstances. It is unrelated to how we even feel about how life is going. And the joy that God offers is a whole different category. So I want you to get your notes out here. And we're going to have some little feelings just to kind of maybe hopefully make some of this stuff stick, make it a little bit more memorable for you today. But here's our definition for joy here today. Joy is a deep, abiding sense of gladness, contentment, and confidence in God that transcends circumstances. Joy is a deep, abiding sense of gladness, contentment, and confidence in God that transcends our circumstances. It's this realization that you already have the only thing that really matters, and it can't be taken away from you. You're saying, Troy, man, you're going to give me a nosebleed here today. That this is kind of like elevated Christian stuff. Are we supposed to be all super Christians? Are we supposed to pretend like we're okay in the middle of our hurt? Are we supposed to be the Christian zombie walking around in denial of reality? And Jesus would say no. And this scene that we're going to look at here today, he paints a very clear picture of how it is we can even process this stuff. Okay, so are you ready? Let's jump into this. How do we experience joy in our suffering and in our loss? How do we activate it? How do we walk in it? We've been, for a couple of weeks now, we've been in the story of Lazarus in John chapter 11. Now, what you have is this little family. You got two sisters and a little brother, Lazarus. Okay, Martha, who is probably the oldest of the sisters, Mary, and then Lazarus, who is at least younger than Martha as far as we know. Now, Lazarus got sick. Okay, and they're in this little village called Bethany, which is about a mile outside of Jerusalem. And when Lazarus got sick, they sent word to Jesus. The reason they did that is this little family, they had a very special relationship with Jesus. They were very tight with him. They had an intimacy that you'll only see Jesus referred to with Peter, James, and John. But somehow Mary, Martha, and Lazarus had this sweet thing with him. So they sent a messenger for a day's journey to get to Jesus. It takes a whole day for him to get there. And when he gets there, the message is this: Master, the one that you love is ill. Please come. And that's the kind of relationship they had with him, because he knew immediately who they were talking about. The boy Lazarus was sick. Now, something you need to know about this is there was a Jewish superstition that said that the body or the spirit would hover around the tomb, around the body for 3 days in hopes that it could be resuscitated. All right? Now I want you to do this math with me here. Okay? Lazarus is very, very sick. They send a message. It takes a day to get to Jesus. Jesus gets that message, and he says, you know what? This sickness will not end in death. But the reality is, when Jesus got the message, Lazarus had already died. And then he deliberately waits 2 days there before he heads back, and he takes another day's journey. In other words, it takes him 4 days from the time Lazarus dies to the time he gets there. Now, the Jewish superstition says, well, 3 days the spirit hovers around. So, in the words of the Princess Bride, right, he's not mostly dead, he's all dead. That there's no question marks at all in anybody's mind. Even the superstitious Jews, that Lazarus was dead, he was gone, he was out. And why would Jesus wait? And in the midst of this, there was all this mourning and all this heartache. And for the Jews, it's a very public experience, man. They mourned out loud. They mourned in public. They would hire people to come and play sad music with them while they mourned. And the traditional mourning time was 7 full days. So Jesus shows up right in the middle of this. And he on the outskirts of Bethany. And they go and they let Mary know, hey, the master is here. So she leaves her place in mourning and she races out to meet him. And all of her relatives, 20, 30-some relatives who are all crying and wailing for the last 4 days, follow her out to meet Jesus. And this is where we are in 11:35. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. Number one, know that Jesus is our great comforter. Jesus is our great comforter. I am a lousy comforter. Ask my wife. That's probably why we have a dog, you know. She's got to get some sympathy in the house somewhere. Because what happens is the dog's like, hey, you okay? You know, little paw on you. But for me, she gets nothing. Because what happens when my wife gets ill, it freaks me out. I get scared. And what I've discovered over time is my fight or flight response when I'm scared is fight. So I tend to get kind of short. I tend to get real tasky. I tend to get kind of aggressive. You might even be perceived as if I'm mad. I'm not really mad. I'm scared, and I'm just trying to get stuff done because I don't know what to do, you know, because I'm a fixer and I can't fix it, right? But Jesus is a perfect comforter. Jesus loves us perfectly. See, he enters in exactly the way that she needed him. She says to him, oh, Master, if only you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And Jesus doesn't respond with a sermon. He doesn't respond with some theological truth. He doesn't respond, you know, with a bunch of nice, you know, flowery words. You know what he does? He weeps with her. He cries the guttural cries of a grown man with her. He enters into her suffering. And we can ask ourselves, you know, well, why was Jesus crying? Well, when you love somebody, the more you love them, the more you hurt when they hurt. And Jesus is hurting with her. But I imagine there are a lot of reasons that Jesus is hurting. He's hurting because of the loss. He's hurting because of all this, you know, he knows what the outcome is going to be. Jesus isn't crying because of the loss of Lazarus, because he knows Lazarus is coming back, right? He said that 4 days ago when he was back at the other place. So why is he crying? Maybe it's because he sees the havoc that death wreaks from the inside out. Maybe he sees the confusion. But he enters into our suffering. He loves us perfectly and completely. And is it fair to say that Jesus, when he suffers, that it's of a higher order than yours or mine? Let me explain. One time, a few years ago, I broke my dog. Well, you know, if we're being technical, maybe she broke herself. But what happened was, my wife and I, we left this big box of Dove dark chocolate bars sitting on the counter. Yeah, you know where this is going. And you know, and it, like dumb me, you know, we left them on the counter, right? And they were mine. Thank you very much. And we got home, and we just find the dog in the kitchen, and she's like, you know, all bloated, and she's surrounded by wrappers. She just binged on this, and you know. The thing is, the chocolate is toxic to dogs. I mean, it can really make them sick. It could even kill them. And so I never thought I'd do this, but we wind up taking her to the vet. Spent $300 to have the dog's stomach pumped. Okay? But we broke the dog. So we, you know, had to fix the dog. It's a moral obligation. And maybe you have a pet. Maybe you have an animal. You have a little cat or something, and they break a limb or they get sick. You know, you feel bad, and you do what you can for them. But is it fair to say that if your child is sick, or breaks a limb, and they have a cast or something, that their suffering is of a higher order than that animal? You know, because their intelligence, their self-awareness, their capacity to ask questions as to what has happened and why it's happened. Now think about this. The creator of the universe, 100% man and 100% God, who spoke it all into being, had perfect communion with the Father, who is the author of life itself, leaves his rightful place of authority and enters in with you and I and suffers with us. On the cross, he suffers for us. And is it reasonable to say that his suffering is of a higher order than ours? The creator and we are created. But perfect love, he enters in. He hurts when we hurt. Scripture says he's a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And you know what? We talk about the problem of pain in this world, the problem of evil, and we have the intellectual answers for those questions. You can talk about, you know, sin. You can talk about free will. We can talk about, you know, man has a choice and how that separates us from. You can do all those intellectual arguments, and those are healthy things to do. But when you're really grieving and you're really hurting, it's just cold comfort, isn't it? It doesn't mean a whole lot to us. But Jesus enters into our hurt. And you might want to say, you know what? Well, God is not off the hook for the suffering of the world. But in the cross, you see the God who has deliberately put himself on the hook for human hurt and human suffering. And that we may not understand all the reasons why things are the way they are, why there is brokenness, why there is death, why there is sickness and hurting and pain. But we know what they're not. They are not because he is indifferent. They are not because he doesn't love us. They are not because he wasn't willing to come close, Emmanuel, God with us, and suffer with and for us. And you need to get a hold of that. Jesus' tears reveal his humanity and his compassion. Now, the next step of this here, and I love this. This is the part that just, it's like the lights were turning on for me this week. Know that Jesus is our great champion. Know that Jesus is our great champion. There's a thing I kind of love to do. My boys are 8 and 9 years old, and they're still pretty, small, and I can still see the tops of their heads. And I love to stand behind them sometimes and just put my hand on their shoulders. I look down at them. And that spot in the top of your kids' heads where the hair just kind of goes in one direction or the other, like northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. And we call that little spot the swirly noggin at our house, right? And every once in a while, I just want to kiss them right on it, just, and it's just great satisfaction I get from that. And I love my kids. I looking down on them, and it probably won't be too long where I'm unable to do that, right? But I put my hands on their shoulders. And every once in a while, we're standing in line, Home Depot, or we're at the school, or we're meeting some new people, and maybe they're a little bit skittish. You know what I want to do? I just want to squeeze them. I just give them a little, right? Because I want them to know they don't just have my affection. They have my strength. They have my authority. They have my covering and my approval. And here we go to Martha. Now, Martha was actually the first one who met Jesus at the outer gate, but we just, for the sake of the sermon, we kind of changed the order of things. But Martha asked Jesus the exact same question as Mary. He said, "Oh, Master, if only you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." But it's almost as if he puts his hands on her shoulder, and he gives her a little squeeze, and he whispers in her ear, and he reassures her, and he says, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" See, he enters in where we need him. With Mary, she needed his tears. And Martha needed his truth, needed his authority, needed his strength. And he enters in right where she needs it. And aren't we kind of like that too? When we're hurting, we want someone to empathize. We want compassion. We want somebody's tears, and we enter in with that, and it's meaningful to us. But if it's not grounded in some kind of truth, it can feel disingenuous. And then there's some people, they might be like hyper-conservative, and they want to give you a little sermon. They want to give you all the points, and this is the truth and everything, but they don't feel with you. And we don't need less than that truth. We need more than that. Don't need less than the tears. We need more than that. And in Jesus, we get both. Martha needed to strengthen authority. Now here's this next section. This is really important. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. Now I want you to circle the words deeply moved. Go ahead and circle those. Now in classical Greek, that word deeply moved, it's a Greek word that says embrimaomai. Right? And what it's typically describing an animal. It's the snort of a war horse getting ready to go to battle or getting ready for a race. It's this primal guttural thing. When it's referring to humans, it refers to anger or outrage. And Jesus is deeply moved. He is angry. He is upset. He's passionate. And we can ask ourselves, why was he angry? Why was he angry? Well, he wasn't mad because they were crying. He wasn't mad, you don't have enough faith, because you're crying, so I'm upset with you. Of course not, because he cries with them. Why is he upset? What if somebody goes to your child and they drive up in front of the school, they open the door, and they try to lure your child into their car with candy? What are you going to do? And you're there. What are you going to do? You're going to say, "No, stop that." Are you going to drag them out of that car ready to beat them? What happens if your teenager, makes some friends, and those friends are trying to convince them that, they can, use these illegal drugs, and it's really not big a deal because it's legal in Colorado. So it's okay. Are you neutral about that? Of course not. And Jesus sees the enemy causing all this havoc, all this pain with the ones he loved. He sees his perfect creation that has been corrupted. He's angry at sin. He's angry at their sorrow. He's angry at the loss. He's angry at the enemy who always seeks to kill, destroy, and confuse us. And he is the champion. He's like that war horse ready to go to battle. He is ready to go to war, and he gets his back up, and he powers up. And the Message translation says it perfectly like this. And Jesus, the anger again welling up within him, arrived at the tomb. It was a simple cave in the hillside with a slab of stone laid against it. And Jesus said, "Remove the stone." And you can imagine him being fully God and fully man. He sees every tear of every parent who ever lost a child. He sees every graveside where a spouse mourns. He sees every eulogy. He sees every sickness. He sees every starving child throughout all of history for all of mankind. And he is angry. He is the champion. He is ready to go to battle. He is facing his foe, and he's about to wield the final blow. And I just imagine that he looks the enemy in the eye. He says, "You worthless, yellow, sniveling, evil waste. I am the resurrection. Lazarus, come out!" And in the cold and the dark of the tomb, at the sound of the Master's voice, his heart starts beating. And for the first time in 4 days, blood moves through his veins. And Lazarus, who is in the stone that's been carved out for his body, next to the remains of his other dead relatives, sits up. And he's wrapped in the grave clothes, and he's restrained, and he shuffles out to the entrance of the tomb. And as the light hits him and everybody there sees, they are shocked into silence. They're stunned. A less gracious Jesus would turn to the crowd and say, "Any questions?" But instead, he says, no. He says, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Jesus' anger revealed his authority and his power. When I first became a believer, I was about 16 or 17 years old. And I got hold of that verse, Psalm 37:4. It says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." I really got a hold of that one, because I'm figuring, now I can get what I want, right? So it's just, you try to power your way into it. I'm like, okay, delight yourself in the Lord. I'm delighting. And it didn't work. I didn't get what I wanted. I wanted a bike, of all sad things. I was praying for a bike, and I thought, if I delight enough in God, I'll get that bike. And then I didn't get it. So I figured that's probably not what it means. And as I got a little bit older, you start to figure that if you delight yourself in the Lord, that's something else. It's to make him your priority, make him your center, your source of your identity. And as you get to know him, he changes your desires, he changes your priorities, your passions, the things that you like, the things that you want to do. And so I figured, then that kind of changes my character and my activity. But in your less lucid moments, when you're standing in the dealership and you go, well, okay, if I've delighted him enough, maybe instead of wanting the red car, I'm going to want the blue car. And it's not really that. I mean, it's maybe not less than that, but I think it's more. And as I've walked with God, for a while now, what I'm starting to realize is to delight yourself in the Lord. To find him for who he is in his glory and his majesty, his mercy, his justice, his closeness. As I delight in him, I start to realize he gives you the desires of your heart because your heart desires him. You get him. And there is nothing greater, nothing better, and it cannot be taken away. You see, we can see Jesus as our great comforter in this scene, and that's true. We see him as our great champion as he shows his anger and his passion. But we also, Jesus, he himself is our great reward. He is our joy. And when you're suffering loss, you have a choice to make. You have a choice to find your joy, to find yourself, to find your comfort, to find your strength in Him. Or you can let that suffering, let that grieving and heartache push you away. You can let it push you the other direction. And you can let it make you bitter. And let it make you angry. And let it make you apathetic and cold and distant and maybe indifferent. And if we let it go far enough, it destroys our humanity. Or we can turn to Him. We can choose Him. We can choose His joy because He is our great reward. And it will make us deeper, more compassionate. It will make us wiser. It will make us more loving, more kind, more present. It's almost like when it gets cold outside here in Kansas. And in the house, the thermostat kicks on. And the heat starts to blow through the house. And as life gets bad, as circumstances come apart, as it gets cold, we lean into Him and the thermostat kicks on. And our joy kicks on. And that thing that cannot be taken away, that confidence in Him, the gladness we have in Him that transcends our circumstances, grows deeper and greater instead of making us bitter. So how do we do this? I mean, how do you lean into Him then? You choose to focus on Him. Scripture says this in Hebrews 12, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before Him, He endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of the God. This is so rich, you guys. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter, some translations say the author of our faith, the creator of our faith. For the joy set before Him, endured the cross, the pain, the suffering, enters into our suffering and our pain, and He endures it, scorning its shame. Why? For the joy set before Him. What is that joy? It's not heaven. He had heaven. He was already there. He already had perfect communion with the Father. He already had all that. Then what could this joy be? I want to tell you it's this. It's the restoration. It's the redemption. It's us. We are His joy. And because the joy of restoring His relationship with us is set before Him, that's why He endured the cross. That's why He suffered the pain. That's why He was willing to go through that. Why the humiliation, the loss, the grieving. And He sees all the hurt of all of mankind and enters in with you and I to be restored to us because we are His joy. And I want to tell you this, as we fix our eyes on Him, He is our joy. He is our reward. He is our promise. And that is what makes it worthwhile. You choose to trust Him because of His strength, because of His authority, because of who He is. He is worthy of our trust. You keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord Himself is the rock eternal. He can be trusted. And we choose to worship Him. The Apostle Paul writes this next verse from prison. He has just been flogged. He has just been whipped. He is bleeding and cut and bruised. On paper, it does not look good. He's in prison. And he and his buddy Silas were doing this. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Are you kidding me? They're singing and praising God in prison, bruised, bloody, broken, beaten, persecuted, and they're singing. How is that possible? Because their eyes were on Him. Their focus was on Him. Their trust was in Him, and therefore they could worship Him because He transcends their circumstances. I talked to you earlier about Rick and Kay Warren and their son that was lost. And she just previously, just a couple weeks earlier, released a book called Choosing Joy When Happiness Isn't Enough. And the irony is not lost on us. I've been following her on Twitter, and just this morning, Okay, this is after they've already had the memorial ceremony and everything for their boy. She wrote this: God gives songs in the night, Job 35:10. Sing them when sadness, anxiety, and sorrow threaten to wipe the music from your heart. Sing now. She is able to say that to us today because of the joy set before her, and that's Jesus. So we're going to sing that hymn. We're going to take her advice from this hymn from Horatio Spafford, a father in 1870, who during the course of about 4 years lost a 4-year-old son and 3 daughters. And as he's crossing the Atlantic to meet his grieving wife, he penned the words to this song. Let's all stand as we sing it together. So in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul writes us from prison again. He suffered unbelievable persecution. He'd been beaten, he'd been whipped, he'd been stoned, he'd been shipwrecked, lied about, slandered. And he writes these words: therefore, we do not lose heart. We didn't lose our joy. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. See, because Jesus was his joy. And he already had the best thing. He already has the greatest thing. And somehow by fixing his eyes on that, by being able to worship while he's in prison, while being able to grasp that truth and pursue it, it made all of that heartache and all that hurt light and momentary in his eyes. It's that old hymn. It says, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face. And the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. The opposite of joy is not sadness. The opposite of joy is despair. It's hopelessness. Hopelessness because the hope was in things that could be taken away from you. But God's joy, the joy that God has to offer us, comes from both the peace we have in his comfort and the hope we have in his strength. You hear that? It comes from the peace we have in his comfort, his tears, his presence, and the hope we have in his strength, in his authority to make things right. Therefore, Nehemiah writes this: the joy of the Lord is your strength. That's just starting to make sense to me. I don't know about you. But it's starting to come together. Because joy, it's this deep, abiding sense of gladness, contentment, and confidence in God that transcends our circumstances. And it's like this. He's the father standing behind you with his hands on your shoulders, and he's just giving you a little bit of a squeeze. And he leans down and he whispers in your ear, it's going to be okay. And in that reassurance that we have from him, we choose to lean into him. We choose to walk with him. We choose to fix our eyes on him. We choose to worship him. We choose to trust him because he is worthy of all of that. Jesus has more than compassion in our hurts. He has the strength and authority to make things right. And we know the world is broken. We know it's messed up. We know this is not how it was meant to be. But he has promises that one day there'll be no more tears. One day, no more pain, no more sorrow, no more gravesides, no more sitting next to your loved one in the hospital. None of that. It will be gone. All the old things will be passed away. Everything is going to become new. Everything is going to be made new by the power and the strong right arm of Jesus, who is mighty to save and do what none of us can possibly imagine in the heartache and the hurt and the loss and the suffering of this life. He is our strength. He is our comfort, and he is our joy. He is our champion, and he is for you. Today, some of you are in the dark. You're in the tomb of your suffering. You're in the tomb of your hurt. And Jesus is saying, come out. Step into the light. And you must say, you know what? But I'm all stinky and ragged and messed up, and I'm stumbling all over the place. And Jesus is saying, come out. Listen to the Master's voice today. Grasp the joy that was set before him, because you are his joy. And he is the joy set before you. And when we get a hold of that, all this suffering and hurt and grieving and loss in life are but light and momentary trouble in the light of his glory and grace. He says, I am the resurrection. I am life itself. And he writes these words to us. John 16, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. Don't lose your joy. I have overcome the world. Many of you here are hurting today. You might have come specifically because of what happened in Boston this last week. And you're asking yourself the questions, I don't understand. Why all the hurt and suffering? And I want to tell you, in Jesus, you have a resource that no other worldview, no other religion, no other perspective can give you. And that a God not only would enter into your suffering, but is the strength to be your joy. The strength that transcends your circumstances. And we have people here today who are going to be in our next steps room, would love to talk with you, love to pray with you. If you need that, just head right here to my right, and it's right around the corner there. Or maybe you need someone to help walk with you through this season of loss, to rediscover the joy that you can have in him. And we have an amazing counseling ministry here at the church, and they would love to be there for you and to help you walk through that. He is our great comforter. He is our great champion. And he is our great reward. Let him be your joy. God bless you guys. You are loved. We'll see you next week.